So now it's time to make ourselves a couple of linkages. Now, just like the fronts, we're going to have the little marker pointing in the same direction. As you can see, it'll be like this, left and left and left. And all of these are the same, so there's no left or right that we got to worry about otherwise. Sorry guys, I jumped past that there. Okay, so now we are gonna put on our hubs, and we have a lot of spacer options. So let's see, they recommend a 1 and 2.5s, which is 2, and then a 2 on the other side. So basically we're centering it. Let me see. Okay, rear hub spacing is middle. So exactly as recommended. So 2.5s. And a 1. And it's definitely easier to do the 3 together first and leave the 2mm for last, because trying to get one big spacer in is easier than trying to get 3 smaller ones, 1 thinner ones, once you get to the point where you've got the hub in place. Okay, and this is where having all these little wrenches can come in really handy. I need a 5.5, which I have one here, and I got one of these too. You know, just like in other places, you don't want to tighten this down so that it doesn't move freely, because you don't want any binding. Now, that's good, so. And remember, make sure your mark is facing the right direction. Wait a minute. I got that wrong. These are supposed to be on the rear side. That's easy enough to do. There we go. And again, make sure the marker is facing in the correct direction. Now, some cars or manufacturers don't give you the ball cups with the hole in the center. I'm a huge fan of these because when I disassemble the car, I don't like to have to pop the ball cup off the ball stud. The more you pop them on and off, the lower the tolerance, or the broader the tolerances are going to be, the looser it's going to be, the more easy it'll pop off in a crash. So when you need to make an adjustment, if you need to take the axle off or anything like that, just stick your wrench through the hole and remove the ball stud with the cup. And that way it's easier to work on that way. Now I've pretty much replaced all of those, so those are going to go in a little Ziploc bag in case I need spares at some point and I don't have titanium. I try to save the Ziploc bags when I come across them, the small ones, because they can be really handy. That's going to go as a spare part. All this hardware can go in a little bag, and it can all go in the parts box for the car. That way I know I've got spares of the right size. Okay, I would say now it's time to go on to shock absorbers, but since I am going to be setting this up for its initial runs with front and rear sway bars. I'm going to go ahead and start on that and get those in place before I put on shock. So I will come back to shock absorbers. Okay, these are the two kits. The front is listed as being for the short course truck. It'll fit on the buggy or the short course truck or any of the 22 line of vehicles. Part number 334001. And this is the rear for the laydown 22.4. And that is TLR 234040. Now, it's going to be interesting to see. There's going to be a special part in this one because there's got to be a way to mount the sway bar, to lock it down somewhere in the center. And there's nothing obvious there, whereas it's obvious on our front one. The recommended numbers that I've got right now is the middle size front and the middle size rear, a 1 millimeter front and a 1.1 or 1.2 millimeter rear. 1.2 millimeter rear. So this is our rear, assembly, and it looks like they give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different sway bars. So we've got a lot of tuning options for our rear sway bar. Now, a lot of people don't run sway bars, especially in dirt, heavy dirt. I probably wouldn't recommend one because you want let me put that better. Let's say it was a loamy track or just a really dusty track, but it was a smooth base. I would probably still go with sway bars. If it has a lot of undulations and a lot of bumps where the suspension needs to have a lot of articulation, that in that case, I wouldn't run sway bars at all. But the tracks these days, most of them are indoor clay tracks. They're very groomed. They're usually kept free of dust and rocks. So it's not like, the kind of tracks I ran on as a kid where it's just dirt with rocks and ruts and real dirt, And these days, it's this indoor clay stuff, blue groove, etc. And on a smooth surface like that, you want the sway bar to limit the body roll because that could lead to a traction roll situation. Once it's kind of like a sailboat. If any of you guys sail, the difference between a catamaran and a monohull. A monohull craft, the further it tips over, the more stable it becomes. It wants to right itself. Whereas with a catamaran, the further up it tips, the more it wants to tip over and capsize. And that's what a car is like. As a car, you're basically running on, two pods of tires like a catamaran. You've got tires, 2 tires here, 2 tires here, and the car kind of hangs on them like that. So when the car starts riding up on 2 tires or lightening these tires, here, if it starts to slide, it wants to come over more. Whereas having the anti-sway bars to keep that car flatter, it's less likely to get into that unstable geometry. So let me see here. That's the 1 millimeter. That's the 1.6. You can see they've got them laser scribed. That looks like the one. I'm looking for the 1.2. That's the 1.4. So we got a 1.6, a 1.4. This should be a 1.2. 1.2. And then we're going to have a 1 which is this one, and then we're going to probably have a 0.8, which is almost impossible to read because it's microscopic, but they're all in increments of 0.2 millimeters, so it makes sense that, you know, you'd go from 1.6, 1.4, 1.2, 1.8. So I'm going to take out my 1.2 for the rear. I'm going to take my other sway bars for the rear. I'm going to get out my parts box. And I'm going to see if these fit in. Yep, they fit in the double slot, so I'm going to put those there. My front ones are going to be a little wider. Those will barely fit. They'll fit, actually. That's good. Okay. We'll worry about those in a minute when we get there, and all the spares. So I'm going to replace as much of this with titanium as possible. We get our own instruction sheet, and this you should keep. I recommend, if you don't staple it to a page inside your manual, at least stick it in there so it doesn't come out and get lost. And I see how that works. That's nice and easy. We're going to have this bracket here, and the sway bar will clamp to the bracket with these two straps, and then our two rear shock tower holes will use a slightly longer screw, and that will anchor this assembly there. Our sway bar will come over our camber links and drop down to the hole right here for it. There's a ball stud and these nice long arms. When I saw the long arms, I figured that had to be above. So, nice little kit. Also, if you want to run indoors, let's say you're going to run indoors on carpet, I would be going with sway bars in a big way. In fact, I'd probably be starting with the heavier sway bars than the lighter ones, to really try to anchor the vehicle down. I mean, if you've seen indoor tracks, it's basically a flat carpeted surface. You've got jumps, but you don't have bumps. You don't have undulations. So you want the car to be low, and you want the suspension to be a nice tight setup, that because you want to focus on corner speed on a track like that. Indoor carpet track, corner speed is going to be where you make up your time. Of course, straightaway speed, but if you can, the more speed you can carry around turns, if there's any big sweepers, you really want to dial the car in for that turn. So if you've got a big sweeper that like drops into some tight turns or something, you want to be able to hammer down that straight and really carry speed around that sweeper, braking at the last minute for tight turns. Whereas otherwise you might have to slow down and take that turn slower because you don't have the stability and you're worried about traction rolling or sliding. So, things to think about. Now, they're not telling us how big these are. There's no nomenclature on this little sheet here as far as screw size. So I'm going to just match those up by hand against the titanium hardware I have. Okay. Okay, that replaces those. So, these little ones for the straps, I do not have those in titanium. I don't know that anybody makes these little M2.5s out of titanium. Everybody that I've tried to source from, they start at M3 and go up in sizes, which is fine. I'm just kind of pre-threading these a little bit. It'll make it easier to do the assembly. Anytime you've got stuff with nomenclature like etched into it, it's always good to orient the piece on the car so that you can see it. So we need a little bit of Loctite for this guy here. And is that the small or the large? I think that's the larger. Let me just test that before I put on. Yep, that's the right size. So now I can put on some Loctite. Okay, we'll tighten that up in a minute. Now what that is going to do is that's going to orient our sway bar in the center. These two little teeth here will keep this wheel lock here in place, and that will keep the sway bar in place in turn. Okay, now there's several adjustment points here, and there are 5 grub screws. One of them is for this, which is this wheel lock here, which is going to keep our sway bar centered. Now, the sway bar right now can do a lot of jiggling, and remember, this kit is set up to take several different sizes, so it needs a bit of adjustability there. Now you see we have this third hole in the strap. We're going to use these small grub screws, and those are going to go in there, and we're going to adjust them so they keep the sway bar so it can rotate, but not so that it's bouncing around. So first thing I'm going to do is center the sway bar. Okay, so there we go. So that's going to keep the sway bar centered left to right, keep it from moving within this little bracket here. Get them both started and get them at least flush. You'll see what I mean when you do it. Okay, so now we want to tighten them in to the point where they start locking down on the sway bar. Okay, now it's touching. See, it's not moving. So now I can back that off a little bit until it turns a little more. There we go. We want it to move freely, but we don't want it jiggling. I'll do the same thing on this side. So our sway bar moves freely, but it's not jiggling forward and backward. That one can use a little more. Good. Okay. Now, another potential adjustment that you can make to sway bars, other than just its thickness, is how far this item is on the sway bar. Like, is it flush to the end? You could move it out a little bit or in a little bit. That's going to change the amount of leverage it has over the arm. Just make sure you do the same thing left and right. I'd recommend just taking it to the edge and then leaving it there. And if you think you need more sway bar, try switching to the next size. And if that becomes too much, then you could try tinkering with this adjustment. So, like I said, I'm going to take this right to the end there where it's just at the end of the aperture. And if you're setting it up ahead of time like I am, make sure the holes, like this one, I've got it pointed rearward so I can get to it. This one, I've got it pointed up so I can get to it, in case you need to make changes or disconnect things. Sometimes the easiest way to disconnect the sway bar is to just loosen the two grub screws and pull the linkages off. That's for when you're working on the car, not if you want to disable the sway bar for a run or something. Okay. I had a feeling about that. Damn, sometimes snapping these suckers in is less than easy. This is a very handy tool. It's not cheap. It's made by Techno. It's for building their shocks, but it's got a lot of options for ball links, and it's really handy. So you just slip the ball stud over that little upright there, and the pin, pushed it through too far. There we go. There we go. So my entire rear swing arm assembly is now put together. Just need to bolt that in place and attach those. So go ahead and just slipping a screw in there for the moment to hold it in place while I get some Loctite going on this one. Don't need much because there's already Loctite in there. I wasn't looking at my drawing here carefully enough. This sway bar mount here mounts here on the front side, and the arms come back and they attach down here. That's why this egg seems so extreme. Doesn't explain what that hole is for there, because our shocks mount out here, but I'm not going to worry about it. Something else looks odd there, but I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Okay, there is our rear sway bar. And that's perfect. If you look at the way this thing goes together there, everything moves nice and smooth. See, one tries to influence the other.